What's going on? How's everybody's night? Yes, new stream. Hey, anything, everything. Hey, Maria. Always nice seeing familiar faces here. How you guys doing? It's always so funny at the beginning of the streams because I just kind of wait for the comments. I guess I'll talk a little bit. Well, hey, I hope everyone's having a good night. I really enjoyed the last two streams that we did, so I thought I would start making it more of a regular thing. I'm going to try to start streaming weekly, preferably on the weekends, but I'm going to have a really busy, like, later half of my week, so I thought that today would be the best day to go ahead and talk to you guys. So, yeah, I'm happy to chat, happy to answer any questions that you guys have, and yeah. I gotta get better at this little banter by myself. Because right now I'm very reliant on everyone's questions. Um, there should be a new video going up this week. I've been kind of posting every 2 weeks, but I decided to do a shorter video that is going to be a little more casual. So that'll be going up at the end of this week, and it's a video about like modern electoral politics, which should be a lot of fun. It's also my birthday this weekend. I turned 23, which is pretty cool. So I guess this is like the closest I'm doing to a birthday stream. Oh, thank you, Maria. It's nice to know you're looking forward to that. Yeah, I mean, I like those the videos that I've been doing lately, like the documentary sort of videos, like those are always so like they're a lot of work and they're really rewarding, but it's a lot of fun. Oh, hi Lily. That's my Hi Lily. That's my girlfriend. And Oi Fernando. Hi man. How you doing? That's awesome that you're here, man. Fernando is Brazilian and he's living in Iowa, I believe. And he always leaves super cool comments on the videos. And he gave me some Brazilian book recommendations to read actually, and I started reading 1802 based off his recommendation, which has been really cool. Thank you, Maria, and anything, everything for saying happy birthday. I appreciate it, guys. It's it's silly to say because I'm 23, but I feel like I got to the point where when a new birthday comes around, I'm like, damn, already. I feel old. So, yeah, I don't know. People people my age seem to not really like getting older, is something that I've I've noticed. Even though getting older is a pretty good thing, it's good to live longer and get more life experience. But yeah, like I said, I was doing a new video this week that's going to be about the 2024 election. It's going to be called The Never Ending Election Cycle, at least so far. And the more that I write it, the less that I like that title, but I might like stick with it and see how much I can come back around to it because it kind of ended up being not so much about that in a way. And I feel like I can't talk about it too much without giving away more about the video. But Fernando said he just watched my FDR video and he thought it was excellent as always. He had a random question if my parents are Americanized or if they have strong roots and or strong Brazilian roots and customs. That's the way that I would say that. Yeah, my parents are not Americanized like at all. My parents don't really have great English, and we speak like mostly Portuguese. I mean, we speak all Portuguese in the house, unless it's like me speaking to my sister. My parents are very Brazilian. Like they both moved to the United States in their 30s. So it really like they are Brazilian through and through. We eat Brazilian food. My parents have Brazilian friends. Like we live in a very Brazilian populated area. Um, and I myself am more so interact with Brazilian culture through the lens of like family. Like I don't have that many like close friends that are Brazilian necessarily. So I do like mostly interact with that through the lens of like my parents and my family in Brazil and my parents' friends that are here and like my friends that are my parents' friends' kids. Thank you for the happy birthday, Fernando. I appreciate that, man. Mhm. You guys have any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I know that we've kind of talked about some things before. Fernando said he. Oh, I'm trying to up the production value of the streams a little bit. So I forgot that I actually set this up where I could put I could put the comments on stream when I'm responding to them. Fernando said he moved now at age 28, and he feels like he might never be able to assimilate like 100% into American culture, but maybe the fact that he lives in Iowa and doesn't have contact with Brazilians helps a little bit. Yeah, I always told my parents that if they had moved to a less Brazilian area, they probably would have better English and they would be more integrated. Just because where we live, like they can go to Brazilian supermarkets and Brazilian restaurants and a Brazilian church, and they have Brazilian friends, you know, like they can be social and they can be like productive members of society within their own little bubble without necessarily having to assimilate too much, which is good because I feel like that does keep me and my sister both more connected to the culture than we would be. Like my parents have friends that live in much like more American areas such as yourself that their kids aren't really as Brazilian. And I don't know. I like to keep that sort of culture alive. Let's see. Next comment. Rundong Yu, I hope I said that right, buddy, said, "Hi, Andre. I thoroughly enjoy your videos, and I have a US politics exam tomorrow where I'm looking forward to using facts from your videos in my exam." Thank you so much for saying that. I've gotten a couple of comments like that before that my videos help people on their exams. And it's funny because I feel like when I talk about history, I don't talk much about the stuff that people usually get quizzed on, like dates and like when this happened and then this happened. I'm very character driven just because I'm pretty interested in talking about aspects of American politics that I feel are under discussed. And I don't know, like I guess it's kind of funny to me because I'm like, oh, I tell people all about like LBJ's upbringing and like FDR's upbringing, but I guess there is the sort of saying that's like a good biography is the story of the times. So then, if you're looking at my videos as biographies, then I guess I would hope that they are good stories of the time that set the tone of what it was like to grow up grow up at that time. Just some dude said, "Your production values are excellent. I was surprised your channel was so small." That's so nice of you. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people leave comments about that, and it's kind of funny because I have a bit of a video production background. Like I was very involved in video in high school and somewhat through college, and I've like worked professionally in that space a little bit. So I had some pretty good like video experience before I started doing YouTube. But I would say that YouTube has like developed my my video production skills significantly. I mean, I've been doing it for almost 2 years, and I don't know. I just with every video, I always wanted to make things better. Like I don't know if anyone, or I'm sure you guys do know, like Johnny Harris has a bajillion subscribers, and I have always loved his editing style, and that's always kind of something that I aspire to. I don't think I get anywhere near it, but it's sort of a goal that I aim for. So don't be surprised if like more time when I have more time to be able to focus on YouTube if I do try to turn the production value up even further than where it currently is. And Justin Dude also said, relatively, of course, you'll get there. Thank you. I I try. Rundong Yu said, also to relate to what you were talking about assimilation, I'm a Chinese person living in the UK, and I do agree that having your own immigrant bubble keeps you connected to your culture. That's so interesting. I always am curious about immigrant groups in different countries, especially one like because in the UK, are there a lot of Chinese immigrants there? Because I really don't I don't know much about like UK immigration. I know they have a lot of Indian immigrants. So I'd be curious about that. Nathan V said, thoughts on a video on the men that built America, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, etc., during the presidential week years. That's an awesome suggestion, actually. I love that title. I might have to write that title down, actually, Men That Built America. It's funny, when I first saw your comment and I saw the name Rockefeller, I thought it was going to be about Nelson Rockefeller, because I recently got a comment suggesting that I do a video about him. But it's kind of funny that that entire political family and their trajectory. But thank you for for the suggestion. Don't be surprised if you see that video sometime in the future. Maria said, "What drives you to create the kind of content that you do? It seems like a lovely contrast between storytelling and political history. I suppose the question is, why is this style?" I guess to answer that question, I think it's just the kind of video that I'm interested in. I know that you were here for at least one of the previous streams, and before I was interested in US history at all, I always very much wanted to be a writer. Like I've seen writing as like my primary creative function, and I've like worked on like a lot of different kinds of writing between like short films and music and like I guess now YouTube videos. So I've always just cared a lot about the written word, as funny as that is to say. And I don't know, like the kind of stories that I've been attracted to are always character driven stories. And I feel like when I was first learning about US history, what interested me the most was the figures. And I almost felt somewhat a little embarrassed by that because I there's a lot of discussions in academic spaces about like great man history and its faults, and you can't really credit everything to the individual. And in some of my earlier videos, I even sort of disavow great man history, I think, in an attempt to kind of fit in with that sort of conversation. But in reality, I was talking to someone once and they told me that they felt like there's been an overcorrection to the point where today we don't talk about the individual enough. And I feel like that's like since that's what I'm interested in them as characters. Like what motivates them? How did they get to the point in their lives that they are? And I think also just being a relatively young person, like I said earlier, I'm about to turn 23, and sort of being like, okay, what are the steps I should be taking with my life? So to look at these people that went on to be extraordinarily successful and see like what were they doing in their lives? Like what are the sort of core values of theirs and core, I guess like the things that helped them get to where they wanted to be at a sort of human level. And I think that's always really fascinating to study. I think Jimmy Carter in particular was one that his own personal story was really inspiring to me. So I guess that kind of answers your question in the long rambling fashion. Oh, Nathan V said that title is from a History Channel special, actually, "The Men Who Built America." So I guess I can't use that title exactly, but I could also maybe I could spin that title for a different video topic. Actually, then maybe. Matthew Barr says, "Who is your favorite U.S. president, and how do you decide who your favorite president is?" I struggle to choose one because it's difficult to weigh the good and bad things that they've done. Honestly, Matthew Barr, I have a really hard time with questions like that because I like similar to what you were saying. I feel like I just get very conflicted in between the good and bad things that they've done, and I guess kind of piggybacking on my answer to Maria's question, I kind of tend to think about it like who's the most interesting president to me, which is a different question altogether. But I think that Lyndon Johnson is like one of the most fascinating human beings that ever lived, and to me, he's certainly the most fascinating president. I think that Richard Nixon is probably second. I think that Nixon is fascinating, and the more that I read about those two men, just like the more enthralled I am. And I feel like they're just two amazing examples of the presidency. So. Okay, Rundong Yu said, "There's a decent Chinese immigration population in the UK. You're right, there's more from India, but the Chinese groups are still easy to find. Example, there's a Chinatown where I live in Birmingham. That's cool. That's nice. It's funny to think because Chinatown seems so popular, but I live in South Florida, and there's very little Asian immigration here, and I don't think there's like a Chinatown in Miami or anything that I know of. So it's interesting that there's one in Birmingham. Okay. Everything, everything. I like your Coke McDonald's video, and I'm wondering if you plan more food cultural analysis. Thank you. I certainly do. I think I thought of that video more so as like a brand analysis, because it's kind of like the history of these things that ended up becoming like super relevant in American culture, and I kind of analyzed it from that lens of American culture. So I feel like I don't touch much on the actual aspects of the food themselves. I know JJ McCullough has some really good content about American foods. So if I were to make like some videos that were about food, I'm curious on your suggestions about that. You also said, I feel like those typically do well since food is so ubiquitous. Yeah, you're probably right. Or a president tier list during a live stream or on a video on the Matthew note. Yeah, I think that would be awesome. I think that there's a good bit of presidents that I don't really know that well about, especially during the Gilded Age. So I would have to do a lot more reading myself. I've mostly read biographies of individual presidents, but I've kind of been looking for a good book that could get me through some significant eras of American politics. So I would love any suggestions on that if you guys have any. Nathan V said, "Who are a couple of the most underrated presidents?" I assume you mean underrated in terms of how good of a president they were, and not in terms of how interesting they are. I'm gonna say, well, I think that James Polk, James Polk, even if you don't necessarily love what he did with American expansionism, which I don't, like I'm not particularly a fan of that, I think that he certainly is the most impactful and influential American president that we don't really talk about at all. I think that I probably would have guessed if didn't know anything about American history that the American president who annexed like pretty much the entire western half of the country would have been a much more like popular and renowned figure. Maria says, also to comment on the UK's migration communities, I noticed massive Pakistani, Indian, Chinese, and Irish communities. Even my own background is massively Irish. Oh, that's that's cool. I It's funny because I think to this might just be speaking to my own ignorance, but I feel like to a lot of American communities, like they kind of tend to just group Irish people in with British people, especially like if I'm watching a TV show or something and someone has an Irish accent, and like if it's a show in the UK and someone has an Irish accent, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I don't know if that's my own little cultural bias there that I just need to be a little more informed on. But thank you for the comment. Mac Jojo said, Hey Andre, just wondering what are your opinions on the debate on who invented the plane between Alberto Santos Dumont and the Wright brothers? Honestly, I'm not very like I don't know that much about that. But it is funny though, because my dad, while I was growing up, my entire life would be like, actually, a Brazilian guy invented the plane. Did you know that? A Brazilian guy invented the plane. I know that with uh I, I this is me speaking from like a place of total ignorance, but I know I saw something once about how it was basically like an evolution, like someone made a plane that could take off, but it would always like crash land, or like someone made a plane that people needed to like run with it before it started to like get the engine running. So I'm not the best person to ask about that. Nathan V pointed out that Polk is also a one-term president. Very, very true. Um, Caleb Porras says, "What's your favorite band?" Honestly, I'm not that big of a band person. I'm mostly a fan of hip hop music. If I don't even particularly listen to a lot of hip hop groups. I'm mostly like a solo artist person. If you were asking me who my favorite band was in the traditional sense, I probably would be fairly boring and say like the Beatles or something because I like a lot of the Beatles songs, even though that's a kind of music that I'm not that usually taken to. But I like a lot of Fleetwood Mac. Also, I like a lot of Fleetwood Mac songs. As far as hip hop goes, like I really love Tyler the Creator. I love Kendrick Lamar. I was a huge Kanye West fan before he turned into a literal Nazi. So that's just a little bit of my music taste. Um, okay. Kaiser Teddy said, "Hey Andre, from which place in Brazil is your family from?" My family is entirely from Minas Gerais. It is a rather rural state in the southwest of Brazil. We're known a lot for our cheese and our funny accents. People from Minas Gerais tend to say like "why" a lot, and that's a sort of stereotype for the area that I'm from. Um, Nathan V says, "Yeah, they say Wrights was more of a glider. Thoughts on the new Mexican president?" I didn't know that Mexico was having a presidential election until very recently. I wish I was more in tune with international politics than I actually am. I know that she's first female president. There's actually a clip of her in the new video that's going up at the end of this week. I know that she beat another lady that was more progressive, but to me it seems like she's also fairly progressive because she's going to continue. I saw something about her saying she was going to continue the legacy of AMLO, who is the current president. So Nathan V says Kendrick or BBL Drizzy. Kendrick 100%, man. I don't care like what kind of Drake fan someone is. Drake got absolutely cooked. Drake got absolutely cooked. He's got people calling him a pedophile on in the club and like singing along the OV ho. Just absolutely bodied. And that new feature that Toronto accent Delilah thing that he put out, horrible. Even if it was supposed to be funny, just completely horrible. Daniel Carter says hi. Hello to you too, Daniel. Hope you're having a nice night, man. Thank you for joining us. Dictator of Canada, I guess we're very privileged to have you here, says, "Greetings from the Canadian prairies. It seems like there are very few politicians today that are well respected compared to politicians in the past. Are politicians different today, or is it bias?" This is actually a lot of what my new video is about. So your question is actually incredibly relevant. I'd say that before there was a sort of fundamental respect that people had for the presidency. I think that JJ did a video about this where he was showing some sort of like I don't remember what president it was, but it was a little silverware set, and there was like a plate that had the president's face on it and the face of the first lady, and just like the thought that that was something people would buy and have at their home. Like the presidency as an institution was something that people just had a much greater fundamental respect for. I think prior to like Johnson's involvement. The involvement in Vietnam during Johnson's presidency, and then what happened during Nixon, and like the trust in government just going completely out the window. And like that's something that kind of came back during the Reagan era, but then like Clinton happens and impeachment and the country's super divided and polarization gets worse and worse, and then you get Bush and Iraq war. And I think that we just have a different view of our leaders than we had at the past. And I think it's actually good to be like a little more cynical and a little more careful when examining these people. But I do think that it would be awesome to see a sort of leader who had that vigor and that sort of like fundamental charisma necessary to unify the country. But I think that even that would be more difficult than in times in the olden times, I guess, just because we're a country that thrives on divisiveness right now. But I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop right there, just because my new video touches on a lot of these things that I'm telling you guys right now. Rockin' Reggie asked if I like country rap. Not particularly. I'm sorry. Kaiser Teddy said he's also from Minas. Let's go. Let's go. I love that. There's like a joke that everyone from Minas knows each other. Kaiser, do you live in the U.S. or do you live in Brazil? I'd be curious because I know there's a lot of mineiros, especially where I live. Dictator of Canada said, "One time I heard a song that sounded terrible. Someone later said it was by Tyler the Creator." There's some really horrible Tyler the Creator songs, especially from his early career. But I don't think I've ever seen an artist who has improved so significantly in the way that Tyler has. Like he just like from Flower Boy on, he has been on an insane run. Like if you look in the back here, I wish I had more of my Tyler albums up, but there's my Igor record there. So that's a fantastic album. I have a painting that a friend of mine made of Call Me If You Get Lost there. I have um I have more Tyler stuff on this wall, but I'm not gonna do all that and turn my computer around. Leaky Trees, other familiar face here, said, "Who do you think the least interesting president was?" Man, least interesting. Well, there's some presidents I just don't know a lot about. Um, I'm gonna say, like Millard Fillmore or someone, and then someone's gonna come with a comment telling me about how interesting Millard Fillmore was, and I'm just saying that because I don't know that much about him, but I don't think I've ever heard someone say anything interesting about Millard Fillmore, at least so far. Just some dude said, opinion. John Tyler is worst president, made a blatant power grab for the presidency and sided with the Confederacy. Even Pierce or Buchanan stuck to the Union. Yeah, I think that that is a perfectly valid argument, and I think it's one that I tend to pretty much agree with. So I, I think I'd be curious if anyone in the chat has any disagreements with John Tyler being the worst president. Nathan V said Drake or Puff. Um, from what we know, the extent of Diddy's crimes seem a lot worse. And there's a lot more evidence than there's some evidence of Drake being really creepy with young women, and that is something that I obviously don't condone. But I think that just from what we have like hard evidence that Diddy has done, Diddy is worse, like undisputably worse. Dictator Canada said yo, but I don't really know what he was saying yo to. So sorry, man. Nathan said, I think the media has made us look at leaders much differently. For better or worse, having a whole media machine talking smack on each other on each side of the aisle 24/7 is nuts. There's dirt on everybody. I agree with you. I agree with you. And that is something I'm going to touch on in a whole section of my video, actually. So I'm going to a little bit on that. Mac Jojo says, your thoughts on the United States relationship with the rest of the Americas before it became a superpower and how the rest of the world views it. Um, so the United States' relationship with the Americas before it became a superpower? Honestly, I don't know if I'm too terribly familiar with that. Most of my studying about U.S. history in general has been during the 20th century. I'd say like that's where the most of my expertise is. So I don't know how well I'd be able to speak on that. I'd have to be a little more educated. I'm reading a book that was recommended by a subscriber who was here earlier named Fernando, who about Brazilian history, and that was very interesting because right now it's talking a lot about the Portuguese king who came over to Brazil for the New World. So I promise to do a little more reading in that era. Maria says, a lot of dialects in the UK, especially around London, some small areas in Northern Midlands, and Liverpool have been influenced by Irish migrant communities. Ooh, I I don't really know how to read that you said. Ta is me Librum Gaelig. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Thank you. Kaiser Teddy lives in Brazil, but he lives in São Paulo. Oh, so you moved away. You moved away from Minas. Daniel Carter says opinions on the 2024 election. Um, I, more stuff I'm going to talk about in my video, but I don't want to dodge a lot of the questions. So I'm going to say I'm. So I have a couple different theories when it comes to the election. I think Biden is fundamentally very unpopular. I think that Trump is also very unpopular. So I think it's going to depend on a few things. Like, I know that immigration has been a huge issue that Biden has been taking a lot of flack on, and it's something that he's trying to counteract now, but not to any level of success from what I've seen so far. And I feel if the election continues being about the current state of the economy and continues being about immigration and continues to be about Israel and Palestine, then I think that Biden probably does lose the election. But I think if Democrats can sort of reframe the election to be more so about abortion, then I think that Democrats could have their way back. And if they could just remind people of how much people don't like Trump, because I think there's just like a little bit of nostalgia right now for the Trump era because it was pre-COVID and or at least like the pre-COVID Trump years. Like it was pre-COVID and the economy was better and like it's easy to be nostalgic for that time. But I don't know. I think Republicans are at an advantage at the moment. I think the Trump right now is like the favorite by a little bit, but I wouldn't underestimate their ability to mess things up because look at like the 2022 midterms, for example. Um, Kaiser Teddy said, "Fun fact for the gringos: There's a city in Minas Gerais that has a lot of expats who live in the U.S." Oh, that's fun. I didn't know that. Actually, I'd have to look into that. Daniel caught Daniel Carter said, "Least interesting was Old Man Bush." I would disagree with that a little bit. I'm not sure if you've seen my last politician video, but I think that Bush is interesting just in like how the sheer amount of political experience that he had, like CIA ambassador, special envoy to China, like vice president, just like this extremely extensive political career. And he's just a sort of politician from yesterday, and he was the last hurrah of a certain type of politician that we just don't really have anymore. And I guess it's a politician that, like, in a way that Biden also fits into. I guess he's kind of interesting in like how standard he was in a way, and he's kind of interesting within the context. But I guess maybe he's not super interesting as a person. Rock and Reggie said, "Imagine naming your kid Miller." I couldn't. I couldn't. Um, Leaky Tree said, "If you could go back in time and change the outcome of a presidential election, which one would you change?" Um, when you look back on history that was so far away, I think I have to go a little bit more recent. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go a little bit more recent. I'm gonna say that, I'm gonna say Bush and Gore. I'm just gonna say Bush and Gore because I think that, man, if Al Gore is president and 9/11 still happens, which like there's an argument to be made about like the messy transition because of like the extended like how the election wasn't figured out for a while and like how that transition process contributed to like bad intelligence or not bad intelligence, but like not really like having all the intelligence and 9/11 happening possibly as a consequence of that, there's like in a world with a decisive Al Gore victory, like we might have been able to get ahead of that. And even if we didn't, and 9/11 still happened, we would have been at war in Afghanistan. But there's no way that we go into Iraq. That it like if we have an Al Gore presidency, that doesn't happen at all. And I consider the Iraq War to be disastrous, and that's something that like in the recent term, I think at least has been like one of the biggest mistakes in American history, and I don't think that's something that most people would dispute. It seems like Nathan V here agrees with me. Um, He's also curious what Hillary would have done as president, at the least make history. Yeah, I mean, it would have been weird. I wonder. I always like to think about the question of who the Republican in 2020 would have been if Hillary won. It probably there's an argument to say that it would have been Trump, but I'm curious on if it would have been Trump if Trump had lost 2016 and he had that kind of like loser stain on him, you know. He definitely would have tried again. Here. Nathan said, Do you think US should be much harder on Israel and pull aid?" Yeah, I think I do. I think it's no surprise for people to know that I'm more of a left wing person myself, and especially just like that I'm comfortable calling it a genocide, honestly. And if even if you aren't comfortable calling it a genocide, I think you have to at least acknowledge that there is the mass killing of innocent civilians. I think that Biden is a president that has been sort of, or at least a Democrat that has been uniquely bad on this issue. I think that Netanyahu, especially, has like no interest in helping Biden out politically at all either. Like I think if it was up to Netanyahu, he would just let Biden lose, and then he gets Trump, and he gets to have everything that he wants. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it. I think that the U.S. is a superpower, and we should be putting influence on Israel, not just giving them whatever they want. But alas. Nathan also said, "Do you see any presidents doing that in our lifetime? Who knows who is pulling the strings?" I assume you mean being much harder on Israel. I'm gonna push back on that a little bit because I don't know if I really agree with like the second half of your sentence. Like, who knows who's pulling the strings? I will say, like, obviously, like institutional people tend to be a lot more pro-Israel, and but I think even if you look at Obama, like I think if Obama was president right now, he would be a lot more critical of Israel, and he'd be like pushing back on Israel a lot more than Biden has. I think Biden in particular is just a very, very pro-Israel individual. Like is like self-proclaimed himself as like a Zionist for years. Like you'll see, like during the Obama administration, like Netanyahu made a big mistake by like turning it into a partisan issue and supporting Republicans and going directly against Obama, and that gave Obama a lot of the political capital necessary to actually be a little tougher on Israel. Like in terms of APAC, like APAC is a big financial contributor, like that's certainly true, and you could see someone like Jamal Bowman, like if you love Jamal Bowman or you hate him, you could look at him right now and see that he's being primaried by a like very pro-Israel candidate with a lot of APAC money. And you know what? Like that seems like an election he might even lose. Like there's a lot of Jewish people in his district too. So regardless of what you think of him, it definitely did take a lot of political courage to speak out on it in the way that he did. So yes. Just some dude said, cracking down on illegal immigration should mean immigration law reform, not just building walls. I hear it's very difficult to go through the legal process. How has your experience been? Honestly, I just rather not talk about my own personal immigration experience, if I'm being quite honest. But I do think that just with immigration, man, nobody wants to touch it. Like nobody wants to touch it on on either side of the aisle in a way that's actually going to address everything that needs to be addressed. Like even though Biden just had proposed the new law that what pretty much gave like the right wing and like Republicans everything that they wanted, but they didn't go for it because it is an election year and they didn't want to give Biden political points. And it was, I don't know, kind of disheartening to see just how quickly Biden turned on that, depending on the political winds versus something like Israel and Palestine, you know. But now he's doing that stuff through executive order. Anyway, so Leaky Trees says, "Has a man fallen into the river at Lego City?" I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. Maria said, George Jr. Bush Jr. was partying with a trans woman he met in college while he pushed homophobic policy in office. Truly an interesting man. Maybe biased due to being transgender myself. I actually didn't know about that. That's an interesting story. I mean, honestly, with someone like Bush and even maybe someone like Trump, I would like they might not even be personally homophobic. It might just be in terms of like the political coalition. Like Trump was a dude from New York. Like I don't think that Trump had like a serious problem with gay people. I think it's just a matter of political convenience, and it might even be the case like that with Bush Jr. himself. Like Bush Jr. Say what you want about him, seems like a pretty chill guy, despite all of his horrible decisions. Um, Mac Jojo said, "Can you do like a retrospective on the United States? It's kind of impressive that what was once a mere colony of the British Empire became the world's strongest country." Yeah, I would love to do a video like that. I think the only problem with that is that sometimes I start a video and I'm like, this video is going to be very quick, and then I end up going into a lot of rabbit holes. Like the Nixon video that I did was originally supposed to be pretty short, and that ended up being my longest video to date. And I think that this was a video that would definitely end up, like, being extremely long. And I don't know if I'm ready to set out on that sort of project yet. Like, I have a day job, and it takes me about 2 weeks to get, like, a full 20-minute video out with me, like, being pretty consistent at it and pretty much, like, treating that like a second job. So if I were to make like longer, bigger scope videos, I think I would have to be maybe a little bigger as a channel also. Maria said the Gaelic message she sent earlier means I do speak Irish. That's nice. Huh. Carlos said, "Who would you have voted? Who would you have voted for between Herbert Hoover and Al Smith?" I think I would have voted for Al Smith. I don't think I'm a fan of the sort of like laissez-faire, like Herbert Hoover style of politics. So yeah. Will Facaroni said hi. Hi, Will. You're another familiar face. I love seeing people who've been here before. Leaky trees. Would you be opposed to the 22nd Amendment being changed so we could see a third term of Obama until he has some decent candidates to succeed him? Oh man, it's funny because I do think Obama would definitely win a third term. As far as the 22nd Amendment goes, I think that hmm, Brazil has an interesting system where presidents can only serve two consecutive terms, but someone like Lula served two terms and then he ended up coming back. Now, I think that that would help just because incumbency bias is a huge thing, and you might just have someone who stays there for a really long time, and that's not exactly ideal. So I say maybe if they could run non-consecutive terms like they do in Brazil is an idea that I'm a little more open to. Nathan said, "Yeah, 8-year presidential max hurts the country if we are forced to lose an amazing president, or even if it's a so-so president. It's what people want slash better than the alternative." Yeah, I think I think that like, that makes sense. It's an argument that I see and I agree with, but there is also just, like, if you look at FDR, like, by the time FDR won that 4th term, he was on the way out, man. Like, his staffers were running that White House, like, he was gone, and I think that's something that is more difficult. Like, I don't think that necessarily would happen today because the president is a much more present figure, and the president has to be a lot more active in terms of just appearing on camera. But I do have those sort of concerns that we might just like incumbency bias would just be kind of pushing someone more so onto the public. Leaky Trees said that their proposal opens additional terms only to Obama and only until we have a good candidate to replace him. I don't really agree with the idea of opening it up to just one person, honestly. Um, Let's see. Carlos said, "How about between LBJ and Goldwater?" I'm seeing some Goldwater stands lately. I would 100% go LBJ. That is not even that is not even close. I would have like especially like if it's me in 1964, I vote for I vote for LBJ easy. Um, would you ever analyze non-American leaders or American non-presidential politicians through your unique style? I would, yeah, like that's definitely on the agenda. I would love to make videos about Brazilian leaders, especially just because I'm Brazilian myself. And I have, for a long time, wanted to do a video about Bobby Kennedy because I think that he is one of the most interesting figures in American politics. It's actually funny. I don't think it ever occurred to me that I hadn't made a video, like a full video on a non-presidential politician. And thank you for calling my style unique. I appreciate that. I try to approach it in a way that I don't see approached by many others on the platform. So I Daniel Carter recently did a huge paper on the 1912 election and is asking my opinions on that and who I would have voted for. Yeah, I think that it's an extremely interesting election, being the only election with three different American presidents running, which is quite fun. I think that I probably would have voted for Theodore Roosevelt. I am a pretty progressive person, and I think I probably would have been a very progressive person in that era. I think that especially like between Taft and Wilson, and like knowing Wilson's opinions on racial matters, I don't think I would have been very keen to him at all. So I I think I definitely would have voted for TR. Do Trump or Biden even survive a second term? I feel like we should almost be voting for vice president at this point. Man, that's pretty grim, but I do think it's fair. They're both quite old men. I I think in particular, during 2020 when Trump had COVID, that was a really weird moment because it was like, damn, if Trump would have died and we would have had like Mike Pence as president for a few months, and that like the election would have ended up being between Pence and Biden, that would have been absolutely insane. Um, uh, I don't want to speculate too much on like whether these two will live or die, but I do think they have a higher probability than almost any other presidents before them. I think if it's interesting because if like Trump, I feel like right now I feel like Trump's gonna pick Tim Scott for VP. Just my own personal hunch. It'd be funny if it just ended up being between Tim Scott and Kamala Harris, and we'd have like the first American presidential election between two Black Americans. We would got it because the two old white dudes died. Oh, anything and everything said Obama v. Bush would be crazy. No, okay, okay. Wait, I might be willing. I might be willing to open up the Obama third term rabbit hole just to see an Obama Trump election. I think that is one of the biggest missed opportunities between in American politics is not seeing an election between Biden and Trump or between Obama and Trump. If China invades Taiwan, do you think the US will respond in full force like Biden said we would? If not, do you think that would be the beginning of the end of US credibility as as a top superpower? That's a really hard question. I think that there would need to be some serious talks between the US and China. I know there's the famous anecdote about the Cuban Missile Crisis, like the U.S. sent the Soviet Union like a list of like a few things that we like terms that they didn't necessarily agree with, and then we ended up sending them something else, or it might have been something at the end of that letter, and they kind of just chose to ignore the first part of it and only acknowledge the part of it that they liked, and it helped, and it ended up resolving the crisis. So I think that a lot of times. Diplomacy comes back to personal relationships, and it comes back to like who's there in that moment. I would like to think that China invading Taiwan is something that we would try to have a little more of a thoughtful response to. Maybe we could end up having a sort of like Russia-Ukraine thing where it's a proxy war instead of a direct war, because direct war would be quite bad. So, yeah, just very, very light conversational topic here, very casual. Maria said Biden is set up to be the first Catholic president to die midway through his term, as the only other was JFK. Yeah, comments like that make it feel like people are really preying on his downfall. It's kind of funny that being a Catholic is something that's gone away, or it's something that has just lost a lot of its controversy because there's not really many conversations about Biden being Catholic. It is also interesting that both Catholic American presidents are Irish Catholics as opposed to Romans. Um, Carlos said, I'm from Spain. What are your thoughts on Pedro Sanchez supporting Palestine? It is being quite a cleavage item here. I think it's pretty significant. Like that whole little group of countries that came out was really, I mean, I think it was really important. I think that it certainly puts a lot more pressure on the US. And it's just like, regardless, even if you are someone who is like very pro Israel, you have to admit that this is ruining Israel's reputation in like just in the international order. It is hurting the US significantly. I think that we are hurting a lot of our relationships with key allies based off of just giving Israel everything it wants in a way that just like it's not helpful to US interests and it's not helpful to Israeli interests. So I don't understand like well, just the cruelty, I guess. I I mean, like I said, I'm someone who is a lot more pro-Palestine myself. Like I said earlier, I believe that it is a genocide. But even if you're someone who doesn't hold those positions and you're just looking at it from a pro-Israeli lens, I think that it's just not going to end well for them. You know. Do a video on American culture and Brazilian culture and their relationships and the similarities between them. Yeah, I've thought about doing that video before. I just never really got around to making it, and I don't know why. I've been wanting to make a video about Brazil for a while. I tend to be pretty indecisive when it comes to the video topics. I think actually I started writing that video if I remember it correctly. Like that'll just happen sometimes where I sit down to write a video and it just doesn't really happen, and that's unfortunate. I wish I was a little more decisive and a little more disciplined in that regard because I think that's an awesome idea. Um, Emerson Cordova said, "What are your thoughts on Kosovo?" I don't know that much about Kosovo. I'm sorry. I believe this is in regards to some stuff that happened during the Clinton administration. Um, Big Germ says, "Do you think there will ever be a president that unites the country? If so, what qualities do you think they would have to do so?" Man, I think that they would have to be able to fundamentally transform our politics because think I don't think that we're really interested in a president that unifies the country right now. I think that like someone like Trump wasn't elected to be a unifying figure. He was elected because he is divisive. He was elected because he pisses people off and people like that. And even in the way that Biden was elected, like that didn't exactly start off with a very unifying note. I mean, just January 6th and some stuff that isn't necessarily Biden's fault. But I think that had Biden been more had Biden been a little more energetic, a little more charismatic, maybe that moment could have been a unifying one for the country. I think that times of crisis are particularly useful. So the fact that like COVID was happening and neither of the COVID presidents were particularly able to do it is a little disheartening. I guess I don't really know what a president that can unify the country looks like, but it's because it's going to take someone with a lot of political talent and someone who I guess is a lot better at politics than myself. I'd I'd be interested in seeing a sort of like FDR type figure, not even just necessarily in terms of like their policies, but in terms of like their rhetoric and their ability to make people believe in a hopeful future during a dark time. But I don't really know what that takes. Thoughts on Ron Paul? I think that Ron Paul has been I I think just for, like, libertarian politics in general, Ron Paul has had, like, a huge impact. I think that I wouldn't have, expected him to be as influential and as long-standing of a figure as he has been, so I kind of have to commend him on, I guess, the perseverance of his political project, even if it didn't necessarily result in, what they originally intended. Will Faccaroni said, "Something weird about Wilson is that despite being extreme racist, he was also the first Democrat to get a large swath of the black vote. Wilson himself essentially said they would regret it." Oh, that's really funny. I actually didn't know that. Okay. Um, Inspired said, "In my opinion, before Trump's indictment, Trump had the upper hand, but now with Trump being a felon, the stigma of being a felon turned some people's stomachs." Yeah, I mean, I think there's two theories there, right? There's, and it's a question of whether it's like, how is your sort of normie, like upper middle class, kind of like Biden, Nikki Haley swing voter gonna feel, right? I think it's a matter of, are they going to see it as like, oh man, like they're like these charges aren't, like these charges are kind of salacious and it's like it kind of seems overblown and I don't think we should be prosecuting a presidential candidate during an election year. Or are they going to look at it like, oh man, like he's a felon, like that. Oh, like I don't like Biden, but the other guy's a felon. If anything, that might just drive people to stay home, if I'm being honest. Um, I think that in terms of Trump base, I think that the people that are energized by the indictments, or not just the indictments, but just the guilty verdict, are going to are probably going to be the people that were going to come out and vote anyway. So I think I'd like to see a little more polling data and just get a little bit closer to the election. Draco Laxi asked, "What is my favorite flag design?" Oh man, I don't know if I have a favorite flag design. Hmm. You know what? I'm gonna say the Brazilian flag. As a Brazilian American myself, I think it's very unique. I think there's no other flag that really looks like it. I think that its colors really reflect the sort of spirit of the country in a really unique way. So I have to go with my birth country on that one. When do you think we will get a non-Christian president? Who do you think it will be? I feel like the only person being talked about is Josh Shapiro. Man, Bernie Sanders got pretty damn close. I think he's the closest that we've gotten. Josh Shapiro is talented. Josh Shapiro is really talented. Swing state governor, won by a pretty good margin, even though he was running. That might be because he was running against Doug Mastriano, who's kind of like a crazy election denying guy. Um, hmm. Honestly, someone who knows all of the presidents a little better than me would have to answer this. But who's been the least religious president so far, in your guys' opinion? I'd love to see that in the comment section and kind of get back to it. Who was the most left-wing US president in history? Um, Man, I guess it depends. Left wing on, like, it kind of varies between domestic and foreign policy, right? In terms of left wing, and I mean, like with social issues, I think that's something that's just going to continue as time goes on, right? Like Biden's certainly the most left wing um president the US has ever had on social issues. I think he's, like, the first president to speak so often about, like, LGBTQ people and, like, transgender people especially is, like, something that I, like, was just very I get surprised to see a president talking about it so much, but, I mean, that's, like, obviously, like, I support trans people, and that's something that I think that, you know, a president should talk about, but I don't think it's something that I really expected, you know? So, in terms of just policy overall, I would say LBJ if it weren't for his super hawkish, foreign policy views, but I think, like, it'd be somewhere between, like, FDR, LBJ, 'cause you'd have to also look at it in regards like, in, relation to the time that they lived in, you know? Um, Nathan says, "Thoughts on RFK?" Oh, I assume you mean Junior, even though I frankly would rather talk about Senior. I'm a big fan of, Bobby Kennedy Senior. I think he's, like, one of the most fascinating figures we've had in our history, just his sheer, passion and intensity, and, I his political evolution have been very interesting to me. In terms of his son, I think he's going to end up being a very impactful third party candidate. I think he's gotten a lot further than I personally ever expected him to get. He's not someone whose politics I personally agree with very much. But I do think that what he's done has been very impressive. I'd be curious to see how much his support holds by the time the election comes around. Maria said there was a statue of President Wilson in Prague, Czechia, due to his recognition of the Czechoslovakian state before the Nazis destroyed it during World War II. Oh wow, that's so interesting. I wonder what other statues of American presidents are there in Europe today? Rockin' Reggie said, "Should the US seriously pursue the purchase of Greenland from Denmark? They said it's not for sale, but it's a classic opening gambit." Ugh, man, that's something I would have to be more educated on. I think it was funny during the Trump administration. Maybe you could tell me a little more about that in the comment section. Um, Jokers is here. Thank you, Jokers, for joining us. Opinion on Nixon. I personally love him just because he's so fascinating. Yeah, I'd say right now, second most interesting president, in my opinion. I just got done reading a couple weeks ago Richard Nixon, A Life by John A. Farrell, and I thought that that was incredible. I think that oh, Nixon's just so fascinating in, like, how tragic his life is and how deeply weird of a of just a person in general he was. I think, like, reading about Nixon was one of the more peculiar US president US presidential biographies that I've ever read. So I would love to talk more about Nixon and to make a proper biography of him sometime in the future. Mac Jojo said, "The first few presidents were deists." I know that, Thomas Jefferson messed around with, deism, and he had, like, his own version of the Bible. I think something about that with Adams too, right? Will Faccaroni says, "I think in Kosovo, there's a statue of Bill Clinton in an area named after him. Also, there's a lone statue of Nixon in a random New Zealand town for reasons I don't know." That's awesome. I would love to be a random New Zealander and come across the statue of Richard Nixon. um, there's not even that many. I don't think there's any statues of U.S. presidents near me. I get upset because South Florida has like no presidential landmarks. There was um there was a Kennedy compound here, and I think in West Palm Beach, and but they sold it, and now it's owned by a different family instead of like making it a museum or something. There was also a nuclear bunker on Palm Beach Island that, I was interested in visiting when I heard about it, but it hasn't been open since, like, 2017, though some people are trying to reopen it. I think Nixon also owned a home in, Coral Gables, and there's a Truman Little White House in Key West, which I would like to go to. That's actually a museum. But I think the Trump Presidential Library will probably be here, and there may be a statue of him there. I'd actually be fascinated in seeing what a Trump Presidential Library looks like. Maria is talking about that statue in Kosovo of Bill Clinton that someone mentioned earlier. Dictator of Canada said, "What scenario could convince you to vote for the more conservative candidate in an election?" Hmm, I think okay. I think if we got to a place in American politics where my sort of left-wing priorities were met, I think that, like, if we were in a sort of like, let's say, like, an issue like Social Security. If we got to a place like that, where Social Security is the third rail of American politics and you can't really touch it, with, like, a lot of, like, seeing more healthcare for people, like, maybe a universal healthcare system and, like, some more social welfare support that I personally am a fan of, and people wanted to start, like, keep going even further than that. I'm by no means like a communist or anything. Like, I tend to get into, or well, I used to get into like more debates with those kind of people that are more left wing than myself. Well, it's funny because just in terms of like, I have a pretty moderate personality, even if my politics may not necessarily be moderate. And I think that kind of tricks people into thinking that I'm a moderate sometimes. And even when people are like passionately arguing for things that I'm agreement with, I tend to be sort of like, okay, but how are we going to do it? Okay, but like, how are we going to get votes? How are we going to package that? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? Like, I'm very practical in that sense. So I think if we like, I don't just want to do left wing policies for like, for the sake of being left wing. So I think if we got to a place where I was satisfied with like the social welfare system and etc., and like there was a left, like the left was just pushing more and more for something like that, as opposed to like a sort of social democracy in like a Bernie Sanders type vision, then I think that I probably would vote for the more conservative party in that scenario. Joker's most overrated president. I'd probably say Reagan, Wilson, or Jackson. Um, Overrated in terms of quality or overrated in terms of how much we talk about them and like how important of a president that they're considered. I think I just tend to prefer to talk about like a president's greatness in terms of like how much they impacted the country and how much they were able to enact their policy agenda, as opposed to just how much I like them. I'd say most overrated US president in terms of like the effect they actually had on the country. Okay, okay. I don't know if he's the most overrated, but I'm going to say that JFK is a very overrated president. I'm going to say that JFK didn't have that much long-lasting legislation, other than I guess civil rights that was enacted by like Lyndon Johnson, who was parading JFK's body around to get more votes. Cuban Missile Crisis is clearly very important. JFK's temperament was very useful there. But I think like other than that, in terms of like lasting like legislative impact and stuff like that, I think that Kennedy is very over remembered because of his assassination. I actually touch on that a bit during the Nixon's thoughts on other presidents video. How Nixon and Johnson were sort of left to clean up, to do like the ugly part of the 1960s, and JFK, even though he was brutally murdered, got to basically avoid the more difficult questions and got to be sort of sanctified in a certain way. That's the right word. Will Faccaroni said, In Rapid City, South Dakota, there's a project called City Presidents, and they have a lot of statues of presidents around the city, including obscure ones like Fillmore and modern ones like Obama. That's cool. I actually didn't know that. I've never been to South Dakota. Actually, I've never been to like the Plains region at all. The most Midwest I've gotten is Chicago, but that's something I'd be really interested in looking at. Nathan said, the definition of left wing or right wing changes so much every presidency. Many 20th century conservatives would be considered nearly left wing, and then Coolidge may be more conservative than most today. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just ideology in general tends to shift a lot, right? I think that uh just the way that we talk about it today has gotten so annoying. But I mean, it's just like most people aren't taking the time out of their days to like study and learn about this stuff, which is understandable because people have their lives and it's like people have jobs and families and stuff like that. And I think being more historically conscious would be very helpful to the average American, but I also understand the difficulties attached to that. So I think if we could sort of have people understand that the history of like the evolution of like left wing and right wing political thought in the US would be very useful. Jokers agreed, then said JFK kind of increased tensions with the Soviets. Yes, yes, he did. But that save, that save was really nice. Big Germ said, "Who's the most consequential president?" Uh, I'm boring, man. I'm gonna say George Washington, and I know that's just like the super standard thing to say, but he fundamentally shaped what the presidency was, what the presidency would become, was just so built around his skill set. Like him leaving after 2 terms, like choosing not to become king, choosing not to rule for life. It's just he is the mold of what the presidency looks like, of what American leadership looks like. Yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made for Lincoln too. I can't disagree with that at all. And I think like Lincoln and Washington are both boring answers, but also they're the answers that people give just because they're, just clearly the most impactful ones. Okay, what other questions you guys got? I'm here for them. What else? Have you guys ever been to presidential libraries? I've only ever been to the Jimmy Carter one in Atlanta, just because there's no presidential libraries close to where I am. But I thought that was a lot of fun. I tried to go to the one in Boston, the JFK one, but that was on President's Day weekend, and all the tickets were sold out. Nathan said Woodrow Wilson. He's been dropping in the list over the few years in terms of being overrated. Yeah, um, overrated in terms of quality. I wouldn't say overrated in terms of impact. Like I think Cynical Historian has a fantastic series of videos about Woodrow Wilson and how consequential of a figure he was, even if the stuff that he did wasn't necessarily very good. Maria said, if Biden won the nomination in '88, he may be more well remembered. Agree or disagree? Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't have been in nearly as divisive of an era of American politics. He would have been a much better speaker. And I guarantee you, his ideology would have been really different from the ideology that we're getting today. Um, yeah, I think I fundamentally agree with that. Let's say, if Biden, because that's the election that George Bush won. If Biden had served like 88 to 96, which was, hmm, yeah, yeah, I do think he would be more well remembered. Joker says worst Cold War president. Man, hmm. In terms of in relation to the Cold War itself, because there's a lot of stuff that Reagan did that I wasn't a fan of, but yeah, I'm gonna it's controversial, but I don't like Reagan. I think he ballooned the defense defense spending while cutting taxes, and the U.S. national debt went insane, which is funny because that's actually like a rather conservative thing to be talking about, like fiscal responsibility like that. But I'm not a fan of Reagan at all. Awesome, awesome rhetorically though, like very, very talented politician. Daniel Carter says, I feel presidential debates are not really debate. The candidates simply lay out what they think and don't actually engage on the merits of their positions. I mean, yeah, that's just the format that we've created, isn't it? It's this very sort of empty, vapid thing for the most part that less and less people are paying attention to, and they end up being a lot less impactful than they used to be. There's a lot less swing voters than there used to be, and I think you could see just in how debates have been handled in recent years with like the third debate getting canceled in 2020, Biden and Trump both like refusing to participate in primary debates against credible primary challengers this time around, and the fact that we almost didn't even get any presidential debates, and now they're abandoning the debate commission. You know, there were just a lot of the norms there have gone away, but they've gone away along with the actual debating that happens. So I don't know. I think I'd be let's get Biden and Trump on a podcast. That's what we need. Let me moderate. Let me moderate a debate with them and see how that goes. Um, Gerald, there's a Soviet domination of Eastern Europe for it. Yeah, that's fair. I understand that. Um, Reagan or HW, yeah. Dictator of Canada said, last summer I went to Paraná state with my Ukrainian dance group. I enjoyed it a lot and interacted with the Ukrainian Brazilian community there. That's awesome. I didn't know anything about the Ukrainian Brazilian community, but I don't really know anything about Paraná. My experience in terms of Brazil is hyper local to the city and state that I'm from. I have been few other places. Unfortunately, I would like to explore Brazil more, and that I think that's something I'll have the opportunity to do as I get older. But I only ever lived in one part of Brazil, so that's cool that you got to that you got to interact with the Ukrainian Brazilian community. Jokers says, why is no one talking about Zachary Taylor? I find him extremely underrated, especially with the time and being from the South. Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that I knew that much about Zachary Taylor. My knowledge really, really is mostly in 20th century American presidents. Nathan says, have you seen the presidential podcast videos by Shane Gillis and Louis C.K.? So hilarious and interesting stories. Glad they spread historical knowledge, making it cool. Yeah, a friend of mine actually told me about the Louis C.K. President stuff, but I haven't gotten a chance to check it out yet, or Shane Gillis either. But I know that I see Shane Gillis clips about American presidents pop up on Reddit and stuff every so often, so I'd have to check it out. Maria agrees with the worst Cold War president being, well, I guess Reagan or Nixon. Man, Nixon was so interesting in terms of foreign policy, though. Just like looking at his diplomacy with China, especially, just fascinating guy. Really like ideologically strange by today's standards. If you want to talk about the evolution of left wing and right wing. Okay, that is the end of the questions for now. I think I'm down to take a couple more, but after that we'll probably start wrapping up. Mac Jojo said thoughts on Peter Santinello. Who is that? Peter Santinello. Let me Google that real quick. American traveler and entrepreneur. Don't know this guy. Sorry. Reagan had some good policies, but his domestic failures ruin it. Yeah, no, no fan of Reagan's domestic policy here. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'm curious, what other formats would you guys like to see from the live streams in the future? Just because I've really enjoyed doing these, but I think that I also understand how the Q&A format could get a little old, especially if I keep doing these every week the way that I've been meaning to. Will said, if you were ever to make a tier list video, what do you think it would be about? Best presidents, movies about them. Oh, movies about presidents could actually be a really fun tier list to do. That's something that I kind of tend to obsess over a little bit, so that'd be a lot of fun. Thank you for that idea. Big Germ said best Cold War president. I'm gonna go LBJ. I know Vietnam was bad. I know he handled that horribly, but in terms of domestic policy, just like remarkable. Just like the sheer amount of stuff he was able to accomplish through legislation. And I think there's an argument to be made that like other leaders would have handled Vietnam like pretty bad as well, and the US would have expanded their troop presence. I just I don't know. I think I have a hard time not choosing LBJ. Um Peter Santinello does interviews all over the US. I'll have to check his video out. Emerson says, do you know anything about El Salvador's president? Unfortunately, I do not. I'm sorry. Daniel Carter said I should take a historical quiz or do a tier list next time. Yeah, maybe I'll do the tier list of presidential movies. I wonder if that's something that exists or if I or if I would have to put it together myself. Well, that'd be a lot of fun. Okay, and I think that would be a really good time to wrap up. I appreciate all you guys for joining. I had a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys for watching it. Okay. I'll answer Maria's comment just last. A collaboration between you and Mr. Beat would be a fun idea. Dude, I would love to talk to Mr. Beat again. I interviewed him a few months back. Super nice guy, super great guy. I need to ask to have him back on the channel. He I would love to do a video with him. I would just have to come up with a good topic for it. um but yeah, that would be awesome. Like, I love Mr. Reed. Seriously, like one of the hugest inspirations I had for starting this channel. Super, super nice guy. He like knew about my channel before I even had 1,000 subscribers, and he's like always been very kind to me, very supportive of the videos, and it was like very reassuring for me to have someone who I like respect so much and who I had watched for so long be a fan of the videos. So. Nathan said Shane and Gillis do a presidential podcast together. I think. Do you mean Shane and Lewis or Shane and Louis? Yeah, I recommend it to you if you don't mind 90s slash aughts dirty and mature humor. Okay, I'll check it out. And okay, on that note, we will actually wrap up, guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I will catch you guys next week for the next weekly stream. See you later. Hope everyone has a good night. Good night. Stay safe out there, everybody.